Humanity had always been considered a fragile species on the fringes of the galaxy to be watched from a distance, a collection of primitive beings struggling with their own survival on a small blue planet among billions of other worlds. Yet something changed the moment the alien ships arrived. Their sleek silver hulls darkened the skies as they descended in perfect formations across the cities of Earth. The creatures aboard these ships were no different than the hundreds of others who had come before them. 1,000 civilizations had come and fallen under the same cold scrutiny of the galaxy's dominant species. But there was something uniquely different about Earth's reaction to the invasion. The moment the first shot rang out, it wasn't from the guns of the invaders, but from a human soldier, one lone human with a rifle in his hand firing up at the massive ship above him. His comrades followed not out of any tactical advantage, but out of something deeper, a primal instinct to protect their home from an enemy they didn't fully understand. At first, the alien fleet laughed at them. They viewed the human resistance as nothing more than a nuisance. Their technology was far beyond anything Earth had ever developed. But they failed to account for the will of humanity. This was a species that had fought to survive for thousands of years against odds that should have wiped them out long ago. They'd fought against nature itself, against their own kind, and even against their own planet. Yet they never stopped. They didn't retreat. They adapted, they learned, and they survived. The alien forces were taken aback by the sudden shift in the dynamics of the battle. Humanity had no advanced weaponry to compare to their hyper-advanced lasers or force fields. But they had something far more dangerous, something that no other species in the galaxy had ever encountered before: determination. When the humans began to organize, they didn't just fight, they created tactics, they constructed weapons out of their environment. They scavenged pieces of the wrecked ships and turned them into tools of war. The humans had an uncanny ability to make the best of whatever they had, transforming the most basic materials into deadly traps and weapons. There were no grand battles, no great heroes to be remembered. But in every corner of the world, the story was the same: small groups of men and women from every corner of the Earth, gathered together not as soldiers, but as survivors, working together to fight back against the invaders. They struck without warning and disappeared into the shadows, leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. The invaders underestimated humanity's ability to unite, even under the most extreme pressure. In cities and towns, where entire populations were displaced, the humans banded together, forming coalitions, sharing whatever resources they had left. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, there was an unspoken bond that tied them together. They weren't fighting for power or resources, they were fighting for survival. And then they made the discovery: deep beneath the ground, hidden away from the invaders, the humans found an ancient structure buried for millennia, a relic of a long-lost civilization, one that had faced a similar threat long before humanity had ever taken its first steps into the stars. The knowledge contained within that structure would change everything. The discovery was made by a small group of resistance fighters working in the ruins of a city once known as New York. They had been scavenging for supplies when they stumbled upon a strange set of doors hidden beneath a collapsed building. The entrance was well concealed beneath layers of stone and debris. But the soldiers knew the area better than anyone. The remnants of the structure beckoned them to investigate with cautious optimism. They pried open the massive slabs of stone that shielded the doorway, and what they found inside would change the fate of humanity forever. The entrance led to a vast underground chamber, filled with intricate carvings and symbols, none of which were familiar. The walls were lined with massive stone pillars, some of which had been shattered by what looked like ancient explosions. But the most remarkable feature was the center of the room, a massive console built into the floor, its surface covered with a complex array of glowing lights and metallic surfaces. The resistance fighters had no idea what they were looking at, but their curiosity was undeniable. They had to know what secrets it held. They worked for days trying to decipher the alien technology around them, using the limited tools and knowledge they had at their disposal. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans didn't give up. It wasn't just their survival instincts that kept them pushing forward. It was the spark of hope that burned inside each of them, the thought that this ancient relic might hold the key to defeating the alien invaders spurred them on. It was Sarah, a former scientist turned fighter, who first made a breakthrough after days of trial and error. She discovered that the symbols on the console were not just random markings, they were instructions, a guide left behind by those who had built the structure before them. The message was clear, it was a warning and a promise. The message revealed that the structure wasn't just a monument, it was a weapon built by an ancient civilization who had fought a battle much like humanity's own. The invaders they were facing were not the first to strike at this planet. In fact, they had been coming for millennia. Their species was relentless and seemingly invincible, but the ancient civilization had found a way to fight back using a technology that was beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of. This technology was no ordinary weapon, it was a harnessing of energy from deep within the planet itself, an energy that had the power to not only destroy entire fleets, but to disrupt the very fabric of the alien ships, rendering them useless and vulnerable. To attack the knowledge was incomplete, but it was enough for Sarah to piece together a plan. She shared her findings with the rest of the resistance, and they immediately began working on translating the alien technology into something they could use. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a chance to push back an invincible enemy, to reclaim their world and their future. The discovery of the ancient weapon became the rallying point for all of humanity. No longer were they a scattered collection of isolated groups, they were a united force, working towards a common goal. The resistance spread the news of the discovery across the globe. The invaders were unaware of what the humans had found. They continued their assault, believing humanity was still hopelessly outmatched. But the first signs of the change came when small groups of resistance fighters began striking their ships with a newfound precision. Their attacks were no longer random, they were coordinated and effective. The humans were learning the ways of the ancient weapon, and the invaders began to feel a sense of unease. They had never expected humanity to fight back like this, and soon they would learn just how wrong they were. The resistance had only just begun to understand the true power of the ancient weapon, and already the tides of war began to shift. It started with small victories scattered across the globe. When the first alien ship was brought down by a new type of human-made weapon, the invaders had assumed it was a fluke, a single ship caught off guard by an ambush. But it wasn't long before more ships fell. The humans were no longer the weak, defenseless species the invaders had dismissed them as. Instead, they had become a force that could strike with terrifying accuracy. Sarah and her team continued to refine the ancient technology they had discovered. Though their knowledge was still incomplete, they found ways to adapt and use it against their invaders in ways the alien forces could never have predicted. The humans had tapped into the core of the planet and found the energy that powered the weapon. They had turned that energy into devastating blasts capable of piercing the strongest alien shields with ease. Every day the resistance grew stronger as more people learned how to use the alien technology. More cities were liberated, and soon the invaders began to realize that they had underestimated their enemies. The resistance had become a network, a vast underground army that spanned across continents. It was no longer just small guerrilla groups fighting back. It was a global coalition united in a common cause. The invaders tried to strike back with greater force, deploying their most advanced warships and troops. But the humans had anticipated this. They knew the invaders would try to retaliate with everything they had, and they were ready. The first major battle took place over the skies of what was once London. The alien fleet descended in massive numbers, with a force that seemed insurmountable. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had the advantage of surprise. The invaders had failed to notice the small fleet of human ships that had been hiding in the atmosphere above. The battle was fierce. The sky was filled with the sound of energy blasts and explosions, but the humans fought with a ferocity that even the invaders could not match. They used the energy from the ancient weapon to disable the alien ships, one by one, their shields flickering out as the blasts hit their hulls. The alien ships tried to regroup, but it was too late. Humanity had already figured out their weaknesses. The battle that had once seemed hopeless was now turning into a decisive victory. On the ground, the humans were not just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with strategy and tactics that no alien invader had ever encountered. They used the landscape to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes that decimated the alien forces in the cities and towns. Resistance fighters were able to move freely, knowing that the invaders were now on the defensive. The news of humanity's success spread like wildfire across the world, and the morale of the people skyrocketed. The once fractured and divided human race had united under the banner of survival. They knew now that they weren't just fighting for their homes, they were fighting for the future of their species. But the invaders weren't done yet. They had underestimated humanity's resilience. But now they were preparing for a full-scale retaliation, one that would test the humans in ways they hadn't experienced before. The final battle was fast approaching, and both sides knew that only one would emerge victorious. The question was, who would it be, the invaders with their overwhelming technology, or the humans with their determination and newly discovered power? The war had dragged on for months and humanity had suffered its share of losses. But with every defeat came a renewed sense of purpose. The resistance had proven that they could strike back, and with the ancient weapon growing more powerful, by the day the humans felt they were on the cusp of something that could tip the balance forever. The invaders had underestimated their ability to adapt, and now they were desperate to regain control. But the humans were ready for the final push. The invaders were gathering their forces for one last assault. They had thrown everything into preparing for this strike. They would wipe out the remaining human forces and make an example of Earth. The first wave would target the ancient weapon's location deep underground and destroy it at all costs. If they could eliminate the source of humanity's newfound strength, they would crush any hope the humans had of victory. Sarah and her team knew this was coming. They had intercepted alien transmissions revealing the plans of the invaders, and they quickly began preparations for what would be their most dangerous mission. Yet they needed to protect the ancient weapon at all costs. It was their last hope. The humans couldn't afford to lose it now. The final battle began at dawn. The first sign that the invasion had begun came when a series of massive explosions shook the earth, sending shockwaves through cities and towns. The invaders had launched a coordinated assault from the sky, and from the ground their ships descended upon the cities. While their ground forces began sweeping through the countryside, they were looking for the ancient weapon, and they would stop at nothing to destroy it. The humans fought fiercely against overwhelming odds. They had no choice but to stand their ground. The resistance was scattered, but they had learned to work together like a well-oiled machine. Sarah led a small team of soldiers deep into the heart of the enemy's territory, hoping to reach the underground complex before the invaders could destroy it. They fought their way through a maze of alien forces as they neared the entrance to the facility. As Sarah and her team made their way toward the ancient weapon, they were confronted by the alien commander, the leader of the invasion force, a towering figure clad in dark armor, his face hidden behind a visor. He had been watching the humans closely and had come to realize something that no other invader had. He had underestimated them from the start, but now he saw them for what they truly were, a species capable of unimaginable resilience. The battle between Sarah and the alien commander was brutal. He was a formidable opponent, his strength and skill were unmatched. But Sarah fought with something the commander could not comprehend, a fierce determination that came from the very core of humanity's spirit. As they clashed, their weapons collided in a brilliant explosion of light and energy. But Sarah's resolve was unbreakable. She fought with everything she had learned from her people and the ancient knowledge they had unlocked. Meanwhile, the rest of the resistance fought back the alien ground forces with everything they could muster. They knew this was the endgame. They would either succeed or be wiped out, but they didn't falter, they didn't retreat. They fought like humans had always fought, with hope in their hearts and fire in their souls. The tide of the battle turned when Sarah managed to land a fatal blow on the alien commander. He crumpled to the ground with a hiss of surprise and rage. His forces faltered without their leader, and the humans seized the opportunity to strike back with full force. The alien invaders had underestimated the power of humanity's will, and now they were paying the price. With their commander defeated, the invaders began to retreat, their confidence shattered by the resilience of the humans. But Sarah knew this wasn't over yet. The invaders would come back with even more firepower. They had seen what the humans were capable of, and they wouldn't make the same mistake again. But for now the humans had won this battle, and that was enough for them to believe that victory was within their grasp. The victory in the final battle was not a moment of celebration for the humans. It was a brief respite in the ongoing war. The alien forces had retreated, but they were not defeated. They had learned from their encounter with humanity, and now they were more determined than ever to wipe out the resistance. But the humans had gained something vital during their victory. They had proven that they could stand against the invaders, and they had proven that their will to fight was stronger than any alien technology. They had learned to adapt and survive when they shouldn't have been able to. Sarah and the rest of the leadership knew that the retreat of the invaders was just the beginning. They couldn't afford to be complacent now. They had to press forward and finish what they had started. But that meant something even more daunting than the battles they had already fought. They needed to bring the fight to the invaders. They couldn't wait for the next wave to hit Earth. They needed to take the fight beyond the planet and strike at the heart of the alien empire itself. The humans had a plan. They were going to use the ancient weapon to propel their forces into space. The knowledge they had gained from the ancient technology had allowed them to reverse engineer parts of the weapon that could be used to power interstellar travel. The next phase of their resistance would not be fought on Earth. It would be fought in the depths of space among the stars themselves. Sarah stood with the leaders of the resistance as they discussed the plan. It was risky to say the least, but it was their only chance. They needed to strike at the alien homeworld before the invaders could regroup and mount another offensive. They would be outnumbered and outgunned, but they would no longer be fighting with nothing. They had the power of the ancient weapon on their side, and they had something that the invaders could never understand: a fierce unity forged in the fires of war. In the following days, the humans began to prepare for the next phase of their mission. They built ships capable of reaching the stars. They worked tirelessly to adapt their technology to suit the immense challenge that lay ahead. Every moment felt like a race against time. The invaders weren't idle. They were regrouping and rearming, and soon they would be back to reclaim their hold over Earth. Sarah and her team boarded the first of the new human warships, a massive vessel designed to carry the fight deep into enemy territory. Their mission was clear. They would enter the heart of the alien empire and destroy everything they could find. The weapon that had been used to conquer countless worlds would now be turned against its creators. As they left Earth's atmosphere and sailed into the vast unknown, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to do. They were venturing into a place where the odds of survival were slim, and the risks were greater than anything they had faced before. But she knew there was no turning back. This was humanity's last chance. If they failed, Earth would fall, and the entire human race would be lost to the stars. They traveled through the dark void of space toward the alien homeworlds. Not knowing what awaited them, they encountered the first signs of resistance. When they entered a sector of space known to be heavily patrolled by the invaders, their ships appeared out of nowhere, striking from the shadows like predators hunting prey. But the humans were ready for them. They fought back with all the fury they could muster. The ancient weapon was now adapted to power their ships' weapons and shields, making them a force unlike anything the invaders had ever encountered. The first battle in space was brutal, but the humans held their ground. They fought with everything they had learned from their years of survival on Earth. They had no illusions about what they were facing, but they had something that the invaders would never have: an advantage. They could never comprehend. The human spirit was unbreakable, even in the face of impossible odds. The humans pushed deeper into the heart of the alien empire, their ships cutting through the cold vastness of space with purpose. Their mission was clear. They would not stop until the invaders had been driven from their homeworlds and their grip on the galaxy shattered. But the deeper they traveled into enemy territory, the more dangerous their journey became. The invaders were not going to let them breach their stronghold without a fight. The human fleet encountered the full might of the alien defenses as they crossed into the most heavily fortified sector of the empire. The vastness of the alien armada was overwhelming. They had numbers, they had technology, and they had the advantage of knowing the terrain. But the humans had something the invaders couldn't replicate. They had ingenuity and unity that had been forged through years of war and hardship. Sarah stood at the helm of the flagship, watching the dark expanse of space stretch out before her. The black void was punctuated by the brilliant flashes of light as their ships engaged the alien forces in combat. Each battle was fierce, but each victory was sweet. The humans had learned to adapt. Their weapon systems had been optimized using the ancient technology. The invaders' shields that had once been impervious to all known weapons now faltered in the face of humanity's attacks. Their ships were strong, but humanity's precision was stronger. In the thick of battle, Sarah couldn't help but think back to Earth. to the way humanity had once been so divided, so fragile, but in the span of a few short months, they had become something unrecognizable, a force that could rival the greatest empires of the galaxy, something the invaders could no longer dismiss as weak prey. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying for it. The alien forces responded with overwhelming force. They deployed their most advanced warships and elite soldiers in an attempt to push back the human fleet. The invaders were angry, their pride wounded by the strength of their enemy, and their desperation to quell the rebellion had become apparent with each new attack. But for every ship they destroyed, the humans learned more. They grew stronger and more efficient in their tactics. Despite their victories, the humans knew this was far from over. The invaders had retreated only temporarily. They had already begun to regroup and prepare for an all-out counterattack. The warships they had encountered so far were just the beginning. The true heart of the alien empire was yet to be revealed, and that's where the final battle would be fought. Sarah's crew worked tirelessly in the days that followed to refine their tactics. They studied the invaders' movements using every scrap of intelligence they had gathered to anticipate their next moves. They needed to strike fast and decisively. If they were to win, they had no time to waste. Then came the moment they had been waiting for. Deep within the heart of enemy space, they detected a massive concentration of alien ships, more than they had ever encountered before. It was the alien homeworld. They had found it, and it was more heavily fortified than they could have ever imagined. The humans had reached the gates of the enemy empire, but they were far from unscathed. The losses had been great. Their fleet was smaller now, but their resolve was stronger than ever. They had come so far, they couldn't turn back now. They couldn't let their people down. They were ready to make the final push to liberate their home and take the war to the very doorstep of the invaders' capital. The moment they entered the final sector of the enemy territory, the full scale of the invaders' defense became clear. It was a battlefield unlike anything they had ever seen. Vast fleets of warships lined up in defensive formations, ready to prevent anyone from reaching the planet below. The humans would have to break through this wall of ships and fight their way to the heart of the empire itself. As Sarah gave the command to initiate the final assault, she knew there was no going back. They were going to face the most vicious fight of their lives. The final chapter of this war was about to unfold, and the humans had only one choice: fight or perish. The moment the human fleet entered the final sector of alien space, the enemy reacted with immediate precision. Their warships surrounded the human vessels on all sides. The vast expanse of enemy ships stretching far beyond the horizon of their sensors. The sheer number of invaders was staggering, but the humans had no choice but to face them head on. The final battle was now upon them. Sarah stood in the command room of the flagship, eyes fixed on the massive display in front of her. The alien fleet was vast and formidable, but she could feel the pulse of humanity's determination running through her. She glanced at the faces of her crew, each one hardened by the battles they had fought, each one with a resolve that matched her own. They had come too far to turn back now. The orders were simple: attack and break through the alien lines. No matter the cost, they couldn't afford to delay. The invaders had already begun to launch their counteroffensive. Their warships unleashed volleys of energy blasts and missiles at the human fleet. But the humans had something the invaders could never anticipate: their adaptability. In the heat of battle, they changed tactics on the fly. Their ships moved with precision in the chaos. They used their knowledge of the alien technology to disable the invaders' weapon systems, striking at their weak points with surgical accuracy. As the battle raged on in the cold depths of space, Sarah's flagship led the charge. The humans used the full power of the ancient weapon to disrupt the invaders' shields, turning their once impenetrable armor into nothing more than scrap metal. With every strike, a wave of enemy ships fell. But the invaders were relentless. Their fleets regrouped, and their counterattacks became more fierce and brutal. The humans had begun to face a new kind of enemy. The invaders weren't just fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to destroy. On the ground below the alien homeworld, the humans launched a daring assault. Their ground forces had already infiltrated the planet's atmosphere, and they had descended to the surface using cloaking technology adapted from the ancient weapon. They were preparing to strike directly at the heart of the alien capital. Sarah knew that this would be their final chance to end the war, once and for all. If they could take the heart of the Empire, they could cripple the invaders' command structure and bring the invasion to a halt. As Sarah's ships continued to engage the invaders' fleets, the ground assault teams began their infiltration deep into the capital city of the aliens. They faced fierce resistance from elite alien soldiers who were determined to prevent the humans from reaching their target, but the humans fought with everything they had learned from their struggles on Earth. Their resilience was unmatched. They fought tooth and nail against the alien forces moving through the city with military precision. Back in space, the battle continued to escalate. The alien ships were now desperate to defend their world. As human firepower intensified, they could no longer rely on their technology alone. Their ships began to self-destruct in an effort to take out as many human vessels as possible. The invaders were throwing everything they had at the humans. Even their most advanced warships were now being used as sacrificial weapons. Sarah's fleet fought back, but it was clear they were losing ships at a rapid rate. Their numbers were dwindling, but the humans were not ready to give up, not when victory was so close. In the midst of this chaos, Sarah received word from the ground forces. They had made it. They had reached the core of the alien capital. They were about to disable the central command station that controlled all the invader fleets across the galaxy. If they succeeded, the alien empire would collapse under its own weight. The invaders would no longer be able to coordinate their forces, and the humans would have won. With that knowledge, Sarah gave the final order. The moment the command station was disabled, the alien forces would be thrown into disarray, and the battle in space would be over. But time was running out. Their window of opportunity was narrowing fast. The fate of humanity rested on a razor's edge. One final strike, and they would either achieve the greatest victory in their history or be wiped out by the very forces they had spent so long fighting. The humans fought with every ounce of strength they had as the final assault on the alien capital reached its climax. The invaders had thrown everything into the defense of their homeworld, but the relentless pressure from the human fleet and the ground forces was starting to break their resolve. Sarah watched from the bridge of her flagship as explosions lit up the sky. The alien fleets were beginning to fracture, their once impenetrable formations now riddled with holes. The humans had found their rhythm and were exploiting every weakness. The central command station was in sight for the ground forces. Their teams were closing in on their target, but the alien defenders were fierce. The soldiers fought tooth and nail to keep the humans from getting any closer. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, the hum of weapons fire, and the roar of explosions. But the humans had trained for this moment. They had trained for every contingency. They had adapted to every obstacle the invaders had thrown at them. On the surface of the alien homeworld, Sarah's troops were relentless. They fought through the streets of the capital, as though their very existence depended on it. Because it did, they knew that if they could disable the command station, they would cripple the invaders' ability to coordinate their war effort, and the resistance would have the upper hand in the final stages of the war. The ground teams moved swiftly, each step calculated and precise. Their mission was clear, and nothing would stop them from accomplishing it. But the alien defenders were not going down without a fight. They sent wave after wave of soldiers and mechanized combat units to slow the humans down. But with every battle, the human forces grew stronger. The weight of the war had forged them into something far greater than the sum of their parts. They were no longer just soldiers. They were a symbol of defiance, an unstoppable force that would not bow to their invaders. As Sarah watched the chaos unfold on the ground, she received word from her fleet. The invaders' ships were in full retreat, their formations scattered as they scrambled to escape the barrage of human firepower. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, and now it was too late. They had failed to prevent the humans from reaching their target, and the final blow was about to fall. Back on the ground, the human forces were closing in on the heart of the alien capital. The central command station was protected by layers of security, but nothing was going to stop the resistance now. They had come too far, and there was no turning back. Sarah's teams pushed forward through the final line of alien defenders, fighting with a ferocity that would have been unimaginable before the war, but they had been tempered in the fires of battle, and now they were ready for this final moment. The alien command station stood before them, massive and foreboding. Its walls were lined with alien technology that hummed with power, the heart of the invaders' empire. But as Sarah's team reached the doors, the station began to power down, the systems flickering and shutting down one by one. The humans had succeeded. They had destroyed the station's core, and the invaders' communication network went silent in that moment. The invaders lost their ability to coordinate their fleets, and the last thread of their empire unraveled. Above them in space, the remaining alien ships began to disintegrate without orders to guide them. The humans continued to press their attack, dismantling the invaders' forces. Piece by piece, the invaders no longer had the strength or unity to resist. They had fallen apart from within, and humanity had delivered the final blow. Sarah looked out at the battlefield and felt a deep sense of relief. But there was no time for celebration, not yet. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The humans had proven they could defeat an empire, but the true test of their strength would come in the aftermath. They would have to rebuild their world and their future. But for now, they could rest knowing they had fought and won against an enemy that had thought them insignificant. With the alien empire crumbling and their forces scattered, the humans had won the most monumental battle in their history. The ground forces had completed their mission and destroyed the heart of the alien command structure. The invaders' fleets were now nothing more than a scattered remnant, drifting aimlessly through the void of space. The once immense alien empire was no more, but even in the wake of this victory, the humans knew they faced a long and difficult road ahead. The war had taken its toll, and rebuilding would not come easily. Sarah stood in the command center of the flagship, looking out at the debris-filled sky, where the remains of the invaders' fleets floated like silent sentinels of a war now lost. She thought of Earth, and all it had suffered during the invasion, the cities reduced to rubble, the lives lost, and the families torn apart. Humanity had endured so much, and now the true challenge began: the rebuilding of everything that had been lost. The war had forged an unbreakable bond between the resistance fighters. The survivors of the invasion had all fought together, and now they would have to rebuild not just their cities and their infrastructure, but their sense of self. They had been pushed to the very edge of extinction and had come out on the other side victorious. But now they would have to learn to live again in a world forever changed. Sarah's leadership would be crucial in the coming days. She knew that the alliance of humans would need unity in order to survive the aftermath of the war. They had won their freedom, but they would have to work together to ensure that the mistakes of the past never repeated. They would need to govern themselves, rebuild their societies, and ensure that the threat of the invaders would never return. The first steps of the recovery began with the re-establishment of communication between Earth and the colonies that had survived the invasion. The human race was no longer limited to one world. Their reach had expanded across the stars, and now it was time to bring everyone back together, to share knowledge, to pool resources, and to help those who had been affected most by the destruction. Sarah called a summit of the remaining human leaders from across the globe. It was time to set aside old divisions and build a new future for humanity. Together, they would discuss how to rebuild Earth and the colonies, how to restore order to the shattered world, and how to create a system of governance that would prevent the rise of any future tyrants. They knew that the enemy had been defeated, but the scars of war would linger for generations. The rebuilding effort would not be easy. It would take years, if not decades, to restore the planet to its former glory. But there was hope now, hope that had not existed before. The people who had once been divided by nations and borders were now united in their shared survival. The people who had once been powerless were now the ones who shaped their destiny. In the following weeks, Sarah traveled across the planet, visiting cities still in ruin, but also seeing the first signs of life returning to the surface, the green shoots of plants breaking through the cracked earth. Children playing in the streets for the first time in months. The sounds of laughter and joy began to replace the silence of destruction. She knew it would take time, but she could feel the world beginning to heal. She could feel the heartbeat of humanity, strong and steady as ever. Yet despite the progress, there was still a lingering question in the back of Sarah's mind. What would the universe think of humanity now? Would they be seen as conquerors or survivors? The war had proven humanity's strength, but there was still so much they didn't know about the universe, so much they had yet to explore. What new threats lay beyond the stars? What new challenges would they face? But for now, Sarah focused on the task at hand, the rebuilding of Earth and the restoration of hope. Humanity had fought for its survival, and had won. They had overcome impossible odds, and proven that they would never be forgotten no matter the cost. The legacy of the human race would live on. As Sarah stood overlooking the rebuilt cityscape of what was once the heart of humanity, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The war was over, but the real work had only just begun. The humans had endured so much, and now they had to find their place in a universe that had once seemed so distant, so untouchable. Earth was healing slowly, but the scars remained not just on the land, but in the hearts and minds of those who had fought to survive. The shadows of the past still loomed, but hope had taken root, and with each passing day the future seemed just a little brighter. Sarah had witnessed the rise of a new unity among the people of Earth. The borders that had once divided nations were now little more than lines on a map, as the world came together to rebuild what had been broken. The cooperation and strength that had been born from years of fighting together against the invaders was now transforming into a new kind of strength, one that transcended the old divisions. Humanity had outgrown the old way of life, and now they were building something new, a world where collaboration and collective will would guide them forward. But the rebuilding process wasn't just about restoring the physical structures of the world. It was about mending the wounds that ran deeper than rubble, the scars of war, the trauma that lingered in the hearts of every survivor. It was about giving humanity the chance to heal and to redefine itself in the aftermath of destruction. Sarah had seen firsthand how war had tested the human spirit, but she had also seen how the human spirit had proven indomitable. Their resilience, their capacity for empathy and unity in the face of overwhelming odds had shown that they were not just survivors, they were something more. They were a force of nature in their own right. As the world moved forward, Sarah continued to lead the efforts to build a new system of governance, one that would ensure peace and cooperation across the globe. The old ways of division had no place in this new world. The time for isolation had passed. The war had taught humanity that in the face of a common enemy, they were stronger together, and that lesson would not be forgotten. The first steps toward interstellar diplomacy began as the humans sent their representatives to the colonies that had survived. Scattered across the stars, they began to form alliances with the remaining pockets of human civilization scattered across the galaxy, bringing their people together once more. As Sarah watched the first of these interstellar ships depart, she felt a surge of pride. Humanity was no longer a single fragile world. It was a united species spread across the stars with the strength to defend itself and the will to shape its destiny. But as the humans ventured further into the unknown, Sarah knew that new challenges awaited them. The galaxy was vast and filled with countless unknowns. They had faced the invaders. But what if other empires existed? What if there were forces out there far more dangerous than anything they had encountered? Sarah couldn't shake the thought that this new era for humanity might also bring new threats that they couldn't yet comprehend. Yet despite the uncertainty, Sarah held on to the belief that humanity would face whatever came their way with the same unyielding spirit that had carried them through the war. They had fought for their survival, and now they would fight for their place in the stars. But as she looked out over the city, once more she knew that the future of humanity was no longer defined by the past. It was defined by the hope of tomorrow, by the dream of a better world, a world where humanity stood united in peace, not just on Earth, but across the entire universe. With the dawn of this new era, Sarah could feel the pulse of something greater than just survival, the pulse of a people ready to explore the stars, to reach out to the unknown, and carve out a future that was theirs to shape. The journey had only just begun, and Sarah was ready to lead humanity forward into the infinite possibilities of the universe, knowing that they had proven one thing above all else, that no matter the odds, no matter the challenges they faced, humanity would always rise.